Hi, we're glad you're here. This is the live stream of Hurricane Idalia. This is going to be impacting close to 14 million Floridians. That's how many are currently under hurricane warnings and tropical storm warnings and watches. It's churning around in the Gulf of Mexico, not expected to make landfall until Wednesday morning, but this can be an extremely impactful storm. Currently, we're sitting at a Category 1, but that's expected to intensify very quickly. Today is the day that people have had to prepare. Already schools were closed as of Monday afternoon, some school districts making that call. Airports like the Tampa International Airport closed as of midnight last night ahead of the storm rolling in as well. But our storm hunters have made it down to Florida. Mark Robinson is there, Patrick Dubelfoy, and he is from our sister station in Montreal, Meteo. So here we are at the beginning of the storm. We've got Melinda Singh, meteorologist, on staff here and watching the storm as well. So all four of us are going to help keep you informed over the next hour as we live stream the latest of Idalia, not yet making landfall, but expected to soon. So Mark and Patrick, you're both there now. What have you seen as far as people making preparations, if anything, and how's it feel out there right now?
You know, it's very hot and humid and getting kind of wet now. We have seen the first rain band from the storm actually make its way over top of Tampa. It was bucketing rain a few minutes ago. And I think people are getting ready, but I haven't seen that many people getting ready around here yet.
That sense of panic, I think, is not there. People seems to be going about. Well, we did see at the hospital, they're building this fence around the hospital to make sure the water doesn't come in. But you don't have the sense that the population is like feeling an urge to hurry up and hide.
Yeah, that's, I think, the big thing, Kim, is like at this point, you know, we've been around Tampa. We were in Orlando, and there was nobody, nobody was getting gas. There wasn't the giant gas lines that we often see. I think when we make our way, potentially we make our way up towards Gainesville, a little further north, where it's expected to come on land a little bit more than here, I think we're going to start to see that more urgent preparation.
But when you see a hurricane is skirting the coast, people are always aiming for the landfall. The landfall is going to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
So today is okay, but maybe not in certain places because it's still close to the coast.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems. Because it's coming up the coast, one little turn is going to make a huge difference. And that's why this one has been very tricky to call, very tricky to see exactly what's going to happen with this hurricane because it's paralleling the coast rather than coming straight in.
Yeah, and now, Melinda, we've been talking about how it is moving in and that storm surge is going to be one of the biggest issues. So let's talk a little bit about how much water could literally be pushed on shore.
Yes, Kim, we've been looking at, storm surges upwards of 12 feet. I just put on this graphic here that kind of shows the different areas that we're looking at in terms of storm surge. Now, these are in meters here, so areas along the coast, areas like Tampa could be looking at upwards to 1.5 meters, even over 2.5, but the hardest hit areas will be right up along the coast, around the bend there, looking at 2 to potentially 4.5 meters of storm surge. Now, of course, this is life-threatening, and it will be occurring around high tide. So this is going to give way to a bit more of the stronger waves pushing on shore. I'll just quickly compare it with the numbers with that in terms of feet. So as you can see, 10 to 15 feet in terms of the overall storm surge. But just like Mark was saying, in terms of the overall picture of the track, a lot of the models are now coming to agreement of exactly the overall track of the storm. I'll just zoom in here for you. So that's exactly where we're looking at, right up along the bend there. But even areas like Tampa, they've already seen rainfall, and they will potentially be looking at more rain as the outer bands of the hurricane pushes through and giving way to more widespread rainfall. Even areas like Georgia and throughout the Carolinas as it crosses over Florida and pushes in through the Atlantic coast, Kim. So we are going to continue to track this, and I just want to quickly show you the overall current radar of this storm. We're already seeing lots of rainfall, and we're also looking at quite a bit of lightning with these storms as they push through. So there's also the threat for tornadoes as the storm continues to make its way closer on land.
Because this is prep day, the state is getting ready, and they have tens of thousands of utility crews on the ground because this storm is hitting an area that doesn't typically get hit by hurricanes. Certainly Florida does, but not this part of Florida. So there could potentially be a lot of debris, a lot of trees down as a result. So utility crews standing by for that. They also have 2,400 high water vehicles. They're ready with urban search and rescue teams. So they're prepared for this. Florida has been hit time and again by hurricanes. In fact, it was a year ago that they were hit by Ian. And both Patrick and Mark have been in their fair share of hurricanes and certainly been in Florida as well. When we talk about hurricanes, we talk about getting away from the wind, but trying to get as high as possible to get away from that storm surge. So a lot of buildings, Mark, in Florida they can withstand the winds of a hurricane, but it's the storm surge that could be very problematic, as we saw in Ian, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kim, where we are standing right here, we are expecting anywhere between 2 to 4 feet and off of the water down there. It's a little bit tricky for you to see how far it's down, but yeah, you're probably, I would say, maybe about here. So, Patrick and I both would be like up to our chests in water.
He would survive.
Yeah, well, that is a very serious thing because you add on top of that surge, you add on top of the waves. Like if you look over the bay here, you can see, waves going there. So those waves begin to batter. So this road right here, this is, I believe, it's Broadway. This street here, likely to be underwater. These sidewalks, very likely to be underwater. Now, it doesn't look like this is going to be the worst case scenario for Tampa, and I think that's one thing that we actually are thankful for.
Yeah, but see the water, we always, for our job and for the viewers, categorize hurricane with wind speeds.
Yes.
But that's not the killer, the number one killer. It's the water that's the number one killer. So people don't, they were saying in the studio, probably a lot of trees down. Also, you need to know that there's many palm trees, and palm trees hardly have any roots.
Yeah.
I mean, very little roots. So that goes down like Legos.
Yeah, now the other thing that, this could be a significant surge event because, Kim, as you were saying, like this area where it's going into the Great Bend area of Florida, if you're looking, straight down on Florida, it sort of does this. Hurricanes rarely come in this way, especially major hurricanes. So this is going to be a big deal. A lot of the land, very shallow, very close to the waters, just a little bit above sea level. So a lot of small towns down around there. Cedar Key is one of them. There's a couple of other north of that. All that water coming in there is a worst case scenario for those small towns.
Anything like here, the area is built around a bay.
Yeah.
So that really gushes the water in and it floods many parts instead of being just in a coast. So anywhere that's built around bays, probably going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, and on top of that, we are going to have potentially what they call king tides. So we're going to have the highest tides potentially of the year happening just as the storm makes landfall. So we could add another 1 to 2 feet on top of that. So these are some of the variables that we have to deal with when it comes to storm surge and how this storm is moving through Florida.
I was hearing DeSantis speaking about where to go, and he's like, people don't have to leave and go very far. They just need to get somewhere safe. They don't have to, travel for miles and miles. They can just get to higher ground and somewhere safer than the coast. I know that fishers were pulling up their boats yesterday in those most critical areas and making sure that they were out of the way because there are some low-lying areas in this part of Florida. It's not a hugely populated area, but as you say, it's not just where it makes landfall. This hurricane can impact people from hundreds of kilometers away from the actual eye of the storm. Now, Melinda, when we're talking about this storm and we've said, okay, it's going to intensify quickly, talk about some of the ingredients that would lead to this storm going from a Category 1 right now to potentially a Category 3 by Wednesday morning.
What's that?
Yes, Kim.
The Weather Network out of
one
Canada.
of the main stories of this is the fact that we're going to be entering more warmer waters. And because the temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico and the northern part of Mexico, or Gulf of Mexico, is roughly 30 to 32 degrees. So that's why we're seeing this intensify and becoming a stronger hurricane before it makes landfall. Now, we do have some questions from viewers on Twitter and YouTube. So one of the questions here are you anticipating it to be different than Ian, where the water receded? Now, because of this, what we're looking at is the onshore flow versus offshore flow. Now, because it's all due to the winds, Kim, and because we're seeing the winds and moving along the coast, that's where we're going to be seeing the more stronger winds, which will push the waves and bring on the water onshore. And that's why we're looking at very heavy storm surge, and not only in those areas where it's going to be making landfall, but along the west coast. So it's not, like we mentioned, not only areas that are going to be affected where the landfall will be, but areas surrounding it where we're going to be looking at the potential for flooding and landslides and stuff like that along the west. So because of that, that's where we're going to be looking at the more stronger winds. Rain is also going to be quite a hazard as well. Just quickly play this out for you. So in terms of how much rainfall we could be expecting along the coast, upwards to over 75 millimeters of rainfall, especially where it makes landfall and tracks into areas like Georgia. We are expecting well over 100 millimeters of rainfall through Thursday. But it is currently a Category 1 storm, and to the next coming hours, there's the potential to upgrade. The National Hurricane Center will be upgrading it potentially into a Category 2 as it gets a bit more of those stronger winds, and then just before landfall has the potential as well to get up to Category 3 because of the winds. I just want to quickly show you a graphic if I have it here, just to highlight the winds and what these categories mean. So a Category 3 hurricane means the wind speeds are 178 kilometers per hour to 208. So if I just look at what currently Idalia's wind speeds are, it is roughly 145 kilometers per hour. These are sustained winds within the storm. So that puts it at a Category 1, a high-end Category 1. So I won't be surprised by the next issuing from National Hurricane Center if they upgrade it to a Category 2 by the 5 p.m., Kim. So we're going to continue to track this. So quite a bit of alerts as well. Widespread tropical storm watches and hurricane watches and warnings right up along the coast into the Big Bend, where we are going to be seeing it make landfall in the coming hours.
Okay, so lots to think about. The Floridians who may not have experienced storms of the past could be experiencing this one in particular, and hopefully they are in safe places as the storm makes landfall in the morning. But we're talking about the fact that this can have huge impacts long before it makes landfall. And with that push, that southerly wind that's coming up the coast that you were talking about, it's literally pushing the water towards the coast. And that's when we're talking about storm surge, all that wave, that big wave of water coming on shore and causing localized flooding, which could be really problematic. I want to go back to our storm hunter, but they're in the middle of a conversation with somebody. But Mark, can we bring you back? I know you have a fan there who is standing with you. So I'm going to assume that you're going to have a bit of a conversation with a local. So go for it.
Yeah, no, David, this is David, and you live in the area, correct?
Yes, I live in Temple Terrace, which is basically Tampa.
Yeah, no, tell me a little bit, like, have you seen much preparations? Are you ready for it? What's the feel for this with this area?
To be honest with you, I feel like there's a lot of hurricanes out there, and this hurricane seems pretty light based off the broadcast, like different networks. But I've been out here, it was about an hour and a half ago, and I was talking to you off of camera just a little bit, and you were saying like the wave bands and the winds and stuff like that was coming in.
Yeah.
And I experienced some of that because I was filming live. I'm here on TikTok, and there's about 340 people watching. If you want to check us out, it's Go Ye TV. Go Ye TV, check us out on TikTok. We're live on there. But I saw the rain coming from the shore, like over there at the tip of Davis Island, and I saw it just coming up.
Yeah.
And it really started pouring down. It was really bad.
Is the feel in general, though, here in Tampa, are people worried? Because I'm not seeing, this is my 26th hurricane that I've been through.
Wow.
And, I often see when I'm in here, I see people boarding up, everything else. I haven't seen that yet. Is that like the general feel of this?
I would say if you're a Floridian, you already know that this is not going to be something terrible.
Unless you're up near Gainesville.
If you're in Gainesville, maybe, yeah, definitely. Like Jacksonville area, going westward, southwest. So it's not looking pretty for them. But over here in Tampa, it's pretty chill. It's a light drizzle right now. You say it's going to get bad. But if you're in a high rise, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
But if you live in a stick-built house, I don't know. It's going to not be too good for you.
Especially down by the water, right? Yeah.
By the water, yeah.
But I was wondering, because we went to the hospital a little earlier on, and they put around the hospital an aqua fence. to stop if there's water surge to get into the hospital. Is this something you see often, or this is like a first-time event?
Well, they just do that as a precaution, basically.
They do it often.
It's like category 2, 3. If it's even a category 1, you're right here by the water, so you're gonna have a little bit of flooding. And so that hurricane, I guess it pushes out all the water, and they do that as a precaution just so the water doesn't come in and flood or whatever.
Yeah, have you been through hurricanes here before?
I have been through hurricanes. Hurricane Ivan was pretty bad. I think that was 2004.
Yeah.
The Destin, Pensacola area. It was really bad. My grandma, who was a praying woman, she actually prayed around the house, anointed the house with oil and everything, make sure nothing was like
was it okay?
Knock her house down. But in the middle of the night, you see when a hurricane comes, it sounds like a train. So we were sleeping through it, and then sometimes we would wake up and hear a train noise. Choo, choo. It was really bad. But you can hear trees cracking in the middle of the night, hitting the ground. You don't know if it's going to hit your house, but at the end of it, the house was completely fine. That was back in 2004, and we have a few photos of us standing on trees that were like planted hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
So
So
her house was fine. Her house was completely fine.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear.
Thank God for that.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us. Appreciate it. And Kim, we'll send it back into you unless you have a question for David here.
Any questions?
I'm glad you had that conversation. I'm sure that he is aware of what's happening. I know he's pretty comfortable with the situation, Mark, right now. I always worry about people who get too comfortable with these storms just because they get so many of them.
Yeah, I mean, you do get quite a few storms. Like, you've been through this. Like, this is almost like it feels like a Florida afternoon in the summer, right? At this point.
Yes. This is pretty normal for a lot of Floridians. Like this right here, just drizzling, like it's normal. Sometimes for Florida, it just comes like a lake on people's heads. It just falls down. But we just thank God because like we really prayed these storms away. In the last hurricane that we got that hit south of us, I think it was Irma.
Ian last year?
I think it was Irma or Ian or something like that. And it really knocked out Fort Myers, that area. I have people.
Oh, that was Ian, yes.
Yeah, a church family that lives over there. And they said like the hurricane really hit really bad, knocked a few houses. Governor came as a state of emergency. And
so
really
if the winds do ramp up for you here, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to be in shelter?
I don't think it is, just looking at the forecast.
If it does.
If it does, I'm praying. I'm praying to God in the name of Jesus that nothing is going to happen bad. Nothing is going to happen bad. I don't believe it is.
Fingers crossed, Kip.
Yeah, fingers crossed for sure. But this is the time if you want to be somewhere safe. Get there now.
Thanks a lot.
Y'all got to. What's y'all's handle?
Oh my gosh, more photos. Okay, Melinda, let's talk a little bit about the possibility.
And you can check us out.
I'm going to wait till Mark's done talking. Okay. There we go. All right. This is live. This is live streaming, my friends. We talked about the storm surge. That's going to be one of the most impactful sides of this storm. We're saying anywhere between 2 and 4.5 meters of water right in the Big Bend. That's what they call this part of Florida. Panama City Beach, one of those really popular spots for Canadians to come down. Tampa, popular. But in between, it's not a very highly populated area. Gainesville certainly does, but along the coast here, the good news is that, again, the population is low, but now is the time. Today is the time to prepare. But the other thing, Melinda, is that there's possibility of tornadoes. Tornadoes can happen with hurricanes, and along with hurricane warnings, we often get tornado warnings. So let's talk a little bit about this phenomenon. If you're not familiar with it, this is quite common.
It is, because there's lots of wind shear, especially as the storm moves on shore. We're getting different winds speeds at different levels. That's going to create the rotation, which is why we see the development of tornadoes, especially because a lot of this is strong, powerful thunderstorms, and that's basically what is the hurricane is made of. These strong thunderstorms that come together and they come a bit more organized, and that's what pushes on shore. So that's why we get the potential for tornadoes, especially for areas like Florida, and as we continue to track it into Georgia and the Carolinas in the coming days. So we do also have some questions from Twitter. I'll first bring up this one from Robin. What do we think about inland areas parallel to Cedar Key, like Rainbow Lakes Estate? So I was looking at just the track of these storms into the next couple of hours, and it's a bit more inland, yes, than Cedar Key. But still, if it's a low-lying region, we're still going to be looking at the potential for quite a bit of flooding, and it's still going to be impacting just south of the area, but we're looking at just the storm surge, and the rain is going to be one of the key factors of this as it pushes inland. So even areas that are not right up along the coast, we're still going to be looking, especially if it's a low-lying area, lots of the potential for water to push through, giving way to some flooding as well. So we also have some more questions, Kim. I'm just going to bring a new one in. Let's see if you can give way to the answer for this one. We've been talking about this off camera as well. The question is, how much of an effect will tomorrow's night's full moon have on shore?
Yeah, and with the full moon, we're always concerned about high tides, and we're not expecting the storm to make landfall at high tide, but it doesn't matter. The storm is moving in as the tide is high, so it doesn't matter if the storm has made landfall or not at that point. And so it's the push of that storm surge, that water coming onshore, that's going to be the big problem here. Places like Tampa could see flooding because of that southerly push of air, and that pushes this storm surge onto shore. And then we're talking about flooding. So essentially a wall of water. That's what storm surge is. And we can see on the highest point 2 to 4.5 meters of water potentially. And you have to keep in mind when we're talking about categories of hurricanes, it is all based on the wind speed. It's not based necessarily on the amount of rainfall we're going to see or the storm surge. So even a category 1 could bring in catastrophic flooding, and that's what people have to know. So there are a lot of elements to a hurricane, not just the wind speed. The wind speed certainly is a good way to determine what the category is, but it's not the only thing to tell you how severe a storm could be. And this one is going to be not only impacting Florida, as you said, Melinda, but moving across to southern Georgia. The Carolinas being impacted. The good news is when these storms cross land, they tend to weaken a little bit.
That is the good news, though. But you did mention the southerly flow. I'm just showing here the wind speed forecast, and that is the hurricane as it essentially moves up along the west coast of Florida, over the Big Bend, and then overland, and eventually it'll be making its way back into the Atlantic. But because of these strong wind speeds and because of this onshore flow, like you mentioned, that's why we're seeing those strong winds and giving way to the higher storm surge, especially for areas along the coast, north of Tampa as well, and just areas right up along, especially Cedar Key. So that's exactly why we're seeing this more stronger storm surge across the area. But overall, in terms of the overall rainfall, the track of it's mainly going to be along the Panhandle. Tallahassee will be seeing the more stronger rains associated with the hurricane, but of course, we can't rule out the threat for flooding as we're looking at those strong storm surges pushing onshore, and like we mentioned, upwards to over 2 meters in height that we've been currently talking about. Just want to take a look once again at the alerts. There's widespread hurricane warnings in effect for many areas along the west coast, Springville, Sarasota, Tampa, even upwards to Gainesville. Even many shores inland are seeing this widespread hurricane warning, as we are going to be tracking it continuing to push through areas like Tallahassee and just west of Jacksonville. So we're going to continue to track the storm as it pushes through. Here's just another beautiful visual of the storm churning in the Gulf of Mexico. So there is the outer rain band. So we are seeing, you can even see a little bit of looks like bubbling up, meaning there are stronger, high towering storms within the outer rain bands. That means we are looking at thunderstorms that could produce the potential for more heavy rainfall and gusty winds. And of course, like we mentioned earlier, Kim, the threat for tornadoes. And even if I throw it to the radar, which we've been monitoring throughout the day today, we're already seeing lots of lightning on these storms, especially for areas more inland. And of course, if we look at velocity, that can give way to the threat for the potential for tornadoes, Kim. So overall, we are still looking and tracking it as it makes its way inland. I'm looking at more of that heavier rain pushing through as we head later into the overnight, especially as we gear up for landfall in the morning hours.
We're expecting power to be lost. That's why there are so many utility crews on standby, tens of thousands, I'm learning. And then when we're talking about these winds potentially knocking down trees in an area that hasn't been hit a lot, and because it hasn't been hit too many times, the trees are still standing. So we're talking about thick brush in these areas, and if trees come down, then power lines can come down. We're also talking about the intensification of this storm, potentially a Category 3 by the time it makes landfall. Category 3 has wind speeds between 178 and 208 kilometers per hour. It can cause devastating damage, loss of roof structure, and water and power outages for several days to weeks. And that's the problem. It's not just losing your power for a short period of time. If the infrastructure is damaged, it's going to take time to rebuild, and that means people could be out of power for a very long time. Even if they don't feel like they were particularly impacted with flooding, loss of power for days and even weeks can be a real struggle for people, and especially in, hot and humid Florida. Okay, I'm going to go back now to Mark and Patrick, who are in Florida, who are reporting live and who will be riding out this storm. Maybe the two of you can talk about this storm in comparison to others that you have been through. Maybe what the similarities and the differences.
It's hard to say at this point, just because we've only experienced the first outer band here in Tampa.
And basically, storms are always different.
Yeah, every single one of them is absolutely unique. But we've only experienced that one band. That's pretty typical. It feels very typical. The one thing that I think, the one thing I think with this one's a little bit different is that it's just it's paralleling the coast, and where it goes in is going to be we're still questioning it.
And timing is also of the essence. If it's at night, people don't see if the danger is coming. They could be vulnerable, but they're all at home, so they're sheltered.
Yeah.
But if it's the daytime, they're out and about, and they can see danger, but they're out.
Yes.
So timing is always also a key element.
And timing as well, Kim, is also all about the tides, right? So if that storm surge comes in on top of high tide, you're adding a lot of extra water in when that storm surge comes in. Here at Tampa Bay, if it was to come straight in here at high tide, we'd be under water like this. And of course, a lot of Tampa is very low, just almost off the surface. The hospital, we've talked to the hospital people over here. They've built something they call an aqua wall. If you check out our Twitter feed, you're going to see it on there, and we talked a little bit about that. And that's going to sort of make sure that the hospital continues to operate, because even if there's this much water here, that hospital has to continue to operate. They have people there that continuously need care. They will not shut down. They will be having people coming in.
They told us they were emergency 1 trauma center.
Yeah.
So
they're absolutely going to be open, and they're right against the water. So they have to make sure that they're going to be able to handle it. Now it does look like we're going to see more like 2 to 4 feet of water here. So that will probably come up over top of the sidewalks here, likely along the front. The roads that run right along the water. But beyond that, it doesn't look like it's going to be that catastrophic event that we feared for Tampa for so long.
Yeah, and when we were here, Irma, 2017, we literally in Tampa saw the water recede from the port and almost got dried. And this is a perfect
it's a perfect example.
Yeah, well, it's something. When you see that, the water's going to come back.
Oh,
it just
I
didn't
seriously, yes.
It just didn't go away and on vacation. It's going to come back.
Yeah.
It's just gathering.
Yeah, it's like a tsunami. When you see the water go out, know it's
time to go. It's not time to go. Well, look at this. The water's gone.
Yeah.
Don't you know?
Yeah. No, unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. And right here, if we do see that, they are going to see some surge here. But as I said, we're not going to see that catastrophic 15 feet of surge. I have been in 23 feet of water. That's almost, at least almost like six meters, I think, or so, of water. That was in Hurricane Katrina. This area of Florida and along the North Gulf Coast is very prone to extreme storm surges. The area that we're talking about, that Big Bend area, very low, and that water can go very, very far inland. So a lot of those smaller communities dotted right along the water's edge, those ones, I'm hoping that everybody is evacuated, and I hope that storm chasers are not planning to be down there for that. I'm afraid some might, but they're going to be under 10 to 15 feet of water, and then you have the waves on top of that.
Because you remember in 2018 when we did Michael in the Panhandle, That's also a low-lying area.
Yes.
And Mexico Beach completely vanished,
Yeah.
except this one house that the guy built
Yeah.
to be hurricane-proof.
Yes.
Worked.
And it works, yeah. But I mean, that a lot of these smaller communities, I was taking a look on Street View, and you can see a lot of these are just smaller houses built. And once that debris starts into the water, the waves and the wind then take that debris and smash it into other things. So there's this accelerating destruction that you see with these hurricanes when the debris starts to when buildings start to fall apart. So these are some of the concerns that we have for some of the smaller communities along that Big Bend area.
Yeah, and I know that they're trying to prepare as much as possible. The state has, 5,500, what is the word? Oh yeah, 5,500 members of the National Guard have been mobilized ahead of this storm. And you know, something that maybe Canadians don't realize, but these coastal areas have sandbag stations that they open up ahead of a storm like this. So these beachfront communities, people can go ahead of time and get their sandbags so they can prepare and protect their properties. But as we know, there's a lot of Canadians who own property in Florida or who rent property in Florida and come down in the winter. We call them our snowbirds. So there'd be a lot of Canadian interest in some of these places, but it seems to me, and you guys can speak to this, that not a lot of the communities likely impacted by this storm are communities necessarily that Canadians will go to in the winter. I may be wrong, but
No, well, north,
Yeah.
in the Panhandle, there's not that many Canadians there.
Yeah, I think
it's mostly south.
it's a lot. I think there's a
South
significant number of Canadians in and around the Tampa region, but not as much.
Naples.
Yeah, not as much up in the
And
Panhandle.
on the other side, Fort Lauderdale, a lot of Quebec people,
Yes.
Fort Lauderdale, and that area.
Yeah, so this one isn't as likely to affect a huge number of Canadians, but I know a lot of people come down here to places like Crystal River where the manatees are. That's a place that I've wanted to go to for a very long time. That could be under 10 to 15 feet of water all through that area. So some of the tourist areas that we like to come down and see may be affected, and well into the winter. We have so many people that Canadians that do come down in the wintertime. Before you come down, if you decide to come down some of the the coastal roads, if you're on your way down to say I'm going to go down to Miami on the west side, make sure that those areas are passable once this storm has passed, because it's going to take a while for this cleanup if it comes in as strong as it potentially could.
And I'm wondering, we had this other guy that came and chat with us, a local, and he didn't seem very worried at all. Does it become that those states that are oftenly battered by hurricane, now for them when they see it on the news, it's like crying wolf and sure.
I think it
Because
can be.
Ian last year, not even a year ago, 11 months ago,
Yeah.
Ian was really damaging just south
Yeah.
of Tampa.
Yeah, in Fort Myers Beach. It was very bad. Yeah. This whole area does get hit a lot, and I think you do run into that issue of people go, I'm not going to worry. And unfortunately, I've seen what happens when people say that, and that's what Hurricane Katrina was for me. So many people were affected by Katrina because they just weren't ready for it. So
we're showing
this one,
images
we're kinda
right
hoping
now
everyone's
of
ready
Ian.
for it, but yeah, I mean, you can see though. I can hear it, and those, just to give you an idea, like that is the kind of winds that this one may come close to. Now, that may be down in those low-lying areas, and if you're dealing with that kind of wind and that kind of surge, this is not survivable.
All the people I talked to through the years when I went down to hurricanes, and I asked them, why didn't you evacuate? Why didn't you go? And they will always cite another hurricane. I was there for that one, nothing happened,
Yep.
I'm sticking around. But sometimes it's your house this time, and it's the other guy's house next time.
Yeah, and I think, again, Kim, I've got my fingers crossed that a lot of people in those smaller communities, in the Big Bend area, and even here in Tampa, if you've got a low-lying house, are taking the evacuation seriously and clearing out. I don't want to see any loss of life in this storm, and if people are following the evacuations, we're not going to have that. I always say it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to check in with Melinda now. I don't know if we have any more questions at this moment, Melinda, but maybe we can go over the storm track a little more, what we're anticipating with this particular storm, Idalia. And I see that we have a little bit of a trend here with the eyes. Ian, Ivan, Irma, And certainly Idalia, all around that 9th named storm of the season, seems to impact Florida.
Yeah, Kim, that's because we get to, peak hurricane season, which is around end of August, early September, mid-September. That's when we see the more stronger and severe storms that have more of that warm energy to push and impact areas along the coast. So that's why names with letter H and I around those names, that's why they're more memorable, because they're around peak hurricane season. But let's shift gears slightly. We're still talking about Idalia, but we're also monitoring Franklin, and a lot of this moisture from this hurricane will be pushing into Atlantic Canada. So we're also watching that. Franklin is currently a high-end Category 3. It has the potential to become a Category 4 storm in the coming hours. And as well, Idalia, it's a high-end Category 1 as of right now, but it will be pushing northward, and it may be impacting areas along the coast of Florida like we've been talking. But let's take it over to Franklin now, which I mentioned, wind speed is over 200 kilometers per hour. That's definitely high-end Category 3, likely to become a Category 4. It's just moving west of Bermuda, so areas in Bermuda will be looking at some strong winds and heavy rainfall as it continues to push northward. Overall, the track of this storm, we are going to continue to see it push areas up along the coast, but it's going to be more far out, so not a direct hit for areas in Atlantic Canada or the eastern regions of the United States, which is really good news. It's more so tracking out of the Atlantic here, but overall, we're still going to be tapping into a lot of this subtropical moisture, and we've been tracking this, and even areas into Atlantic Canada, due to the potential, some areas could see well over 100 millimeters of rainfall in the coming days. So this is just looking at the moisture. It's just frontal systems that are pushing through, tapping into subtropical moisture, and it's pushing it well into Atlantic Canada. So continuing into your Tuesday night, into your Thursday, many areas throughout Nova Scotia, PEI, and even areas across Newfoundland and Labrador has potential to see well over 50 millimeters of rainfall. Just want to highlight southern portions of Newfoundland because we are looking at red, so that's definitely well over 75 millimeters. Flash flooding and overland flood risk is definitely going to be on the cards in the coming days, because even areas in through Halifax, they've been seeing quite a bit of rainfall well over our average, especially throughout the past summer months. It's been very wet, and the ground's already oversaturated, and with this additional moisture, Kim, this means flash flooding and the risk for flooding will continue as we get more of heavy rainfall with very strong atmospheric moisture. But another thing to take into consideration for Wednesday is we do have the threat to see severe possible storms across many regions of Atlantic Canada, eastern portions of Newfoundland, New Brunswick, PEI. So the threat for localized flooding, even with those embedded thunderstorms with the rainfall. So definitely the risk for flooding continues, strong winds, and the potential for small hail. And of course, we can't forget the potential for lots of heavy rainfall, Kim. So definitely a lot to track and monitor Atlantic Canada. So not only down across Florida, but we're also tracking things here at home for the potential for lots of moisture from Franklin to push on across Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, and Atlantic Canada has had a tough summer when it comes to rainfall. Of course, we started off the summer with the wildfires in Nova Scotia. Now we're talking about more rainfall on what has been one of the rainiest summers on record. Certainly right now in Halifax, you're on track. You're number 3, and that's ahead of this next rain from Franklin. And remember, as Melinda was saying, it is not a direct hit from this storm, but the moisture is being pulled up into Atlantic Canada, and that's why we're seeing additional rainfall across the Maritimes and Newfoundland. And then with that threat of thunderstorms, we could potentially get convective rain, which is just a little more intense. And I know this is bad news for a lot of folks. Farmers, for example, who would be looking at bringing up their crops sooner than later, and then with this kind of rainfall, it's all very problematic. Here's another look at the track of Idalia. So right now, Category 1, potentially a Category 3 hurricane when it makes landfall. This is the cone of uncertainty. So where exactly the eye of the storm makes landfall, there's still some room to wiggle, but it doesn't have to be the exact spot where the eye lands that is necessarily the only place that is impacted. We can see all around the area. We could have some very heavy rain, certainly storm surge all along the coast, and then those powerful winds as well. And when we talk about a hurricane, the wind speeds are what indicates what category it is. Right now, Category 1 with about 145 kilometer per hour winds. But the storm surge and the rain are not factored into the category. So the winds could be at a certain level, but the storm surge could make the storm that much worse. And any, category, we talk about Category 3s and 4s being major hurricanes and can cause catastrophic damage. But when we're talking about just knocking out power and flooding, a Category 1 can do that. No problem. It is still a very strong storm. And when we talk about hurricanes, we talk about hiding from the wind and running from the rain, because you want to get to higher ground with storms like this. So topography is taken into account. Anything along the beachfront could be impacted by this, and some severely. We saw what happened with Ian, Melinda, the kind of damage that was done there. But this one, again, just rolling right up the coast before making its way in the Big Bend. And so that's the area that kind of joins the peninsula of Florida into the Panhandle. I know Panama City is one of the places that a lot of Canadians go down to, Panama City Beach, but it looks like it won't hit there directly, but certainly that area will be feeling the winds because of how big this storm actually is. So here we are, the 9th named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season, the 3rd hurricane. Dawn was the 1st, but likely the 2nd major hurricane, Melinda.
Yeah, Kim, you got that right. We've been talking about storm surge a lot, and I just have a graphic here that shows exactly the definition of what this means. So it's rising of the sea due to atmospheric pressure changes and wind associated with the storm. So when we get hurricanes, one of the main things we track is the atmospheric pressure. So I'm just looking for this graphic to show you the current pressure of the storm, if I can see. Oh, here we go. So the current pressure is 974 millibars, so it's deepening, and when it deepens, that's when we get more of that stronger circulation. Of course, that's when the winds pick up as well, and because of the circulation and because of the higher intensity, the winds play a main factor, especially as it pushes on shore, and the winds will drive the waves and create that strong storm surge across many areas, like we're looking at for across Florida, the west coast of Florida, the Panhandle, and especially the Big Bend. But areas like Tampa, Kim, we've been talking about this because of the onshore winds that will be pushing a lot of that moisture and the southerly flow across areas like Tampa. That's what we're watching for, even not only just direct landfall for areas just north of it, but Tampa and areas along the west coast of Florida will be seeing very high storm surge because of the strong southerly flow that'll be pretty much pushing all that moisture and all the waves in across the area. So winds are one of the main things we look at in terms of which areas will be getting the strongest amounts of wind and waves, and of course storm surge, which is related to that. But overall, we are going to continue to track the storm into the coming hours and into tomorrow as well. We do have a live stream happening as well. That is going to be at 7 a.m. Eastern time, and we'll be tracking Hurricane Franklin and Idalia live. So make sure to come back in and tune in for that at 7 a.m. Eastern time. But once again, Kim, we are continuing to track the storm. Here's a quick overlook at the potential impact. So Category 3 potentially, this is what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting for the state of Florida before it makes landfall. And this is roughly going to be 8 a.m. on Wednesday, so tomorrow morning, and potentially upwards to over 205 kilometers per hour in terms of the overall sustained winds. We did mention the threat for inland tornadoes as the outer walls will push over across mainland Florida, and it looks like the storm will be tracking into southern areas of Georgia, mainly southeastern areas, and track along the Carolinas, up along the coast. So we could also be seeing some dangerous storm surges there as well, and it will be pushing back into the Atlantic Basin, where it could re-strengthen, but it will downgrade back to a tropical storm after it makes landfall along Florida and in through Georgia. So it's quite a lot. We're also, you did mention some of those main storms, Kim. Here's just a quick look at more historical dates in terms of U.S. major landfalls. These are just some Hurricane 3, 4s, and 5s. And we've seen a lot. We even saw, tropical storms that pushed through. I was watching some more feeds back earlier in my day, and I was looking at Tropical Storm Hermine, and because of that, it's definitely targeted areas like Cedar West as well. So areas more inland, we haven't really seen major hurricanes. This could definitely be one of the books, especially impacting areas along the Big Bend, Kim. So once again, we're going to continue to track these storms. Radar, we are looking at lots of lightning on these storms as they continue to push inland along the outer rain walls.
Wanted to mention that the governor of South Carolina has now issued a state of emergency for that state ahead of the storm moving through. And I know for Florida, there's a state of emergency in 46 counties, I believe, ahead of the storm hitting there too. So you have to do it ahead. This is what secures money from the federal government. So this is what brings in the funds and helps them more. Once there's a state of emergency, then that can happen. And when they can see that this is moving their way, obviously it seems like a good move, because South Carolina is not going to miss this storm. It's going to travel right through that state as well. It's going to affect likely North Carolina too before it goes out into the water a little bit. So we'll be watching what this storm does over the next 48 hours or so. And I want to bring Mark and Patrick in. I believe that if they're ready to go. I just have a question, because we have some video here about the aqua wall that was set up around the hospital. I know you were there for that. So when we're going to bring up the video, I want you to talk a little bit about this precautionary take that they're doing.
Well, of course, being in a low-lying area, as soon as there's going to be a storm surge, this water could be coming into the hospital, which could become a big, big, big problem. So they put up this aqua fence, I think they call it. And we were just talking about it, Mark and I, and it seems that they put down in the cement, in the ground, in the tar, basically, some kind of a metal circular device, which the screw grabs onto. But we're thinking, they told us that it's not the first time they put it on. So probably this part stays permanently, and they just, every time they need it, probably they have a meeting and somebody says, get the wall out.
Now, what's interesting about the engineering on this is that it's designed not just as a wall that's just sits upright in the storm. It's actually it's an L shape. So it comes down, and then the L actually faces the water. So when you have force against this, it actually is pulling up. But if this is so you got the weight of the water on top of that, plus it's held down. So it's very unlikely to collapse with the battering waves. So it's a brilliant piece of engineering. Of course, they did say it was fairly expensive to put in. And the reason they've got it there is because this is a functioning hospital, and they have to continue to function through the storm.
But like you say, it's a very fantastic piece of engineering. I'm even wondering, because I'm thinking climate change, more storm, maybe it's something that we're going to see more often in different places, because we're talking a lot about adaptation. That's as important as reduction.
Well, one of the big changes actually came after Hurricane Andrew, when it blasted through just north of Miami, destroyed, I believe it was the Homestead area. That changed the building codes for Florida in a big way, because they said, these houses were not built to withstand the kind of punishment that Andrew handed out. And Andrew was just one of this is a state that is hit constantly by hurricanes just because of where it sits. And climate change isn't going to change the number of hurricanes, but what it likely will do is increase the wind, increase the maximum wind speed. And this year, we're going to get a big test with how fast these winds potentially can get, because the water out there is like bathtub warm.
if you go on the eastern seaboard, not only Florida, I mean the Carolinas, New Jersey, if you go on the eastern seaboard and you walk on the beach on vacation, you'll notice that some houses are on stilts and other houses are on the ground. The way it works is that if your house gets destroyed by a hurricane, let's say, your insurance company will say, we will rebuild, but not there. You have to rebuild 1 mile inland. If you want to rebuild there, you got to rebuild on stilt.
Yeah.
So all the houses that you see on stilt, they were once destroyed. But sure enough, you can just imagine these people that spend most of their life putting money away so they can retire on beachfront.
Yeah.
And now you tell them, no, you have to go 1 mile inland.
Yeah.
No. They're going to agree with this stuff.
Well, and unfortunately, though, that beach is going to follow them inland. I mean, that's the big problem. We've seen this. It's not just a problem that we see along the coastal areas of Florida. It's something we see in the Great Lakes. You know, we're seeing already areas down in Lake Erie where people are essentially losing their houses because they're seeing so much erosion with the Great Lakes. And down here, though, the potential for some beach destruction is definitely here. When we're talking about Tampa Bay, it doesn't look like we're going to see the eye wall come anywhere close to Tampa Bay itself. So we're not looking at that 10 to 15 feet of, which would be absolutely catastrophic because that would put it like well over these trees behind us. And that would just go so far inland here in Tampa. But if we are talking about the Big Bend area, a little further to the north towards Gainesville, and perhaps even as far as Tallahassee, those areas may be seeing the real impact from this storm.
And those surges, yes, it's a lot of water. Yes, it could bring a lot of destruction. But when it leaves, there stays a lot of sand, a lot of debris, a lot of things. The roads are not suddenly open. All right, water's gone.
Yeah.
They have to start cleaning up, and that's another expense. These things become very, very expensive as we go along.
Yeah, and we do expect some catastrophic power outages in some of those areas. Just given the speed at which these winds may be, I've seen one estimate. I don't quote me on this one, but 175 miles an hour. I think that's overdoing. I think it's going to come in more like 120. But you could have some high gusts in there. Those bring down trees. Those bring down power lines, and it sometimes takes a very long time to get power restored.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys.
Most of the time, yes.
Okay, I wanted to ask you where you plan to wait out the storm. I know you're going to be in the middle of this storm. I have seen you in parking garages before. Talk about the safest place, because often people will see weather people down in these storms when everybody else has evacuated, and they question why you're there in such a dangerous situation. So if you can assuage some people's fears of you being there where other people may not be, talk about where you ride out this storm.
Well, this will be hurricane number 26 for me. So I've got a little bit of experience going through these kinds of storms. And one of the safest places that you can have is a parking garage, a well-built parking garage. Now, not all coastal communities have that, with multiple levels so you can stay above the storm surge. That's the most destructive thing. What we're trying to do is document the storm to show people what it's like in the heart of some of the most destructive storms on the planet.
Because it's amazing, it doesn't, just like that, you might not realize it, but the atmosphere on Earth is just 30 kilometers thick. And it's actually just the size of on the Earth that you had in school, that the teacher had in school. It's the same thickness as a varnish. Yeah. But look at what it could do. It could develop 200 kilometers an hour wind. It could bring storm surge. It could kill basically a lot of people. Yes, that coat makes the living possible for for mankind, but it's also could be very, very destructive. So it's not that big, but boy, does it have a punch.
Yeah.
So you guys are going to be in Gainesville, Florida. That is the plan. And right now you're in Tampa, obviously. But no, I did want to know exactly where you were going to be. And people, as Melinda was saying, can tune in at 7 a.m. Eastern, because you will be live streaming this storm, and hopefully we have good communication with you. We can see and hear that hurricane, but also you'll be in a safe spot. So we have just about 4 minutes to go. I'm going to bring it over to Melinda to talk a little bit about the storm track and the timing of Idalia. Melinda.
You got it, Kim. Overall, we're going to continue to track it as it pushes up along the coast. So we are going to be looking at it intensifying in the next couple of hours into potential Category 2 storm, and then before it makes landfall along the Big Bend, putting into a Category 3. So this is the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, and it will be tracking over the north end of Florida, impacting areas like Georgia. It will weaken down to a tropical storm as it continues to push inland, but areas, southeastern areas of Georgia, along the coast of North and South Carolina, definitely have to be on the watch because we're going to be looking at quite a bit of heavy rainfall. And of course, the winds are still going to be very impactful. Storm surge definitely on the cards, and it will be tracking back out to sea by the weekend. So lots to continue to track, Kim. We'll also be talking about a lot of the high storm surge for areas along the west coast of Florida, and of course we're still monitoring areas throughout the Big Bend. Tallahassee, not really seeing much of the more stronger waves, but they will be looking at more heavy rainfall in terms continuing in through the next couple of days. So here's the overall track of the rains. Direct bullseye for areas like Perry, Tallahassee, well over 75 or 100 millimeters of rainfall as the storm continues to push inland in the next a couple of hours into your early Wednesday morning. So, and of course, like we mentioned earlier in the live stream, the potential for tornadoes is possible. Already seeing lots of lightning on these storms ahead of it in through areas of Georgia and along the coast areas of Florida as well. But there we have quite a bit of circulation. It is a high-end Category 1. Won't be surprised if it becomes Category 2 by the next 5 p.m. update, and then into the next coming of hours, even a Category 3 before landfall. So it is going to be very rapidly intensifying in the next coming hours because it is going over, Kim, water temperatures that are over 32 degrees. So very warm water, that's the fuel for these storms, an environment that has not a lot of wind shear. So it looks like it's going to intensify as we continue into the coming hours.
Yes, and we can't perfectly forecast a hurricane. Sometimes these storms do what they're going to do, but the closer we get to landfall, the better chance or better idea we have of what this storm is capable of. So yes, it's been for the last 48 hours or so that forecasters have been predicting that Idalia could be a Category 3 storm. And it doesn't have a lot of time to ramp up that much, but as you're saying, Melinda, the waters are 32 degrees Celsius or more, and that is like pouring fuel on a fire. It's the warm waters of the Atlantic and certainly the Gulf of Mexico that help to build these storms, and that's why late in the season, August, September, even October, we get more and more storms ramping up because the waters are that much warmer. So beginning of hurricane season, June, you may get one or two. This year we didn't get any hurricanes for a while. Well, Dawn was, but the others were named storms, so tropical storms. But this one could be a biggie. Now, it may not hit Category 3. That's a possibility as well. But right now, Melinda, with all of these ingredients that you've been talking about, the potential is there. So today was the day for Floridians in the path of this to get prepared.
I mean, there is still a little bit more time, but time is running out because it will be pushing on shore early Wednesday. I just want to highlight this graphic one more time. I just paused it because you can see the strong southerly flows, and that's what's going to give way to the strong and very high storm surge along the coast, west coast of Florida. So areas like the Panhandle won't be seeing much in terms of the overall storm surge, but definitely life-threatening for areas along the west coast, especially throughout areas like the Big Bend, where we will be looking at the potential for this storm to track inland and make landfall around that region. So continue to stay with us as we will continue to update you as well. Like you mentioned, we will be live 7 a.m. tomorrow talking about Franklin and Idalia and bringing you all the latest.
Okay, and thanks for joining us today for this live stream. And of course, we welcome your questions on all social media, and hopefully they can answer as many as possible. Thanks for joining us. And Melinda, thanks for your info.